Welcome to the spine-tingling world of our unholy tales, where fear takes its darkest form and every shadow holds a chilling secret. We are your guides through the twisted and nightmarish tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat, clutching your pillow for dear life. Get ready to embark on a journey into the abyss of your deepest fears as we explore the realms of the supernatural, the macabre, and the unknown. The year of our Lord, 1621. The wooden wheels of the Mayflower creaked against the dock as we disembarked onto the shores of the New World. After months cramped together in the bowels of that accursed ship, the feeling of solid ground beneath my feet was a blessing. But the biting cold that pierced our woolen clothes was an ominous sign of the hardships to come. There were 102 of us that had survived the treacherous voyage across the Atlantic to establish a new colony in the name of England and our Lord. We were pilgrims, seeking religious freedom and a chance to live piously, away from the corruption and temptation of the old world. As we staggered ashore, weakened by malnutrition and disease, we saw nothing but wilderness stretching as far as the eye could see. The trees were bare of leaves, gnarled fingers clawing at the steely sky. There was no sign of civilization, no roads or houses or fields under till. It was as if we had landed at the edge of the earth itself. We quickly set to work, establishing a camp on the shore and scouting the area for threats. On one of these missions, we encountered the native tribe who inhabited these lands. To our surprise, they greeted us warmly and offered assistance, though communication was strained by the language barrier. Their leader, Samoset, had picked up some English from interacting with earlier explorers. Through him, we were able to negotiate and gain permission to establish our settlement in the area. We called our colony Plymouth, and though the first winter was brutal beyond measure, with sickness ravaging our people, come spring we saw God's providence in allowing us to flourish. The native Wampanoag tribe became our allies, generously teaching us how to hunt, farm and gather food from this new land. In November 1621, after our first successful corn harvest, we declared a 3-day feast to thank the Lord for his blessings. Little did we know the horror that was to unfold. The first day of feast had an air of jubilation. Our tables buckled under roasts of fowl, pork and venison, platters of fresh-caught fish, bowls brimming with corn and squash. Ale flowed freely as we revelled in our good fortune. With the generous help of the Wampanoag, it appeared our struggling colony would survive our first year. I remember squinting against the setting sun, watching the native men demonstrate their athletic games on the coast. They whooped and hollered as their feet kicked up sand, weaving sticks flying through the air. One of our maidens, Eliza, was enraptured by the display, transfixed by one handsome brave in particular. Her eyes followed his lithe, muscular form as he launched his spear at a makeshift target. It was the last glimpse of joy we would have. That first night was when the vision started. When I retired to bed after an evening of merriment, my mind was light and untroubled. But as I slipped into slumber, ghastly images flooded my mind. I was plagued with horrific scenes of blood and carnage, naked savages dancing in firelight, their faces contorted by otherworldly frenzy. In my nightmare, I heard words in a tongue that chilled my soul, imploring unseen powers of evil. I awoke with a shudder, beads of cold sweat on my brow. The fear clung to my heart, and I spent the rest of that long night praying to God, clinging to my Bible as though it were a talisman to ward off demons. When dawn broke, I emerged, haggard and exhausted, to find that others had suffered the same visions in the night. We broke our fast quietly, not relishing the bounty of food. The warm autumn sun on our backs felt ominous now, lacking its wholesome radiance. As we gathered for the second day of celebration, I noticed dark shadows under the eyes of each colonist, and their fingers twitched nervously towards charms and crosses. But Governor Bradford valiantly urged us to shake off this foreboding feeling, declaring it some trick of our adversary, the devil, meant to undermine our celebration and faith. That afternoon we once again convened with our native allies, as their hunters brought wild ducks and deer to add to our feasting tables. Though we smiled and exchanged pleasantries through Squanto, our interpreter, I noticed Chief Massasoit wore a strange expression. His eyes seemed to harbour some unspoken knowledge, hooded and calculating. Night fell like a black shroud over our settlement, extinguishing the bonfires and snuffing out the lamps. I retired to my cabin, exhausted by the day of forced revelry and burdened by dread. When sleep stole me from wakefulness, the visions returned, more vivid than before. I was shown horrors beyond description, acts of primal violence and depravity, naked bodies writhing in shadowy woods, chained and bleeding upon crude altars of stone as droning chants echoed under the moonlight. Horrible shrieks cut through the night. I seized my weapon and rushed outside, where I saw fires blazing. Dark figures darted among the trees, savages piercing the night with their war cries. Bedlam reigned, seizes of panic, breaths choked with smoke. I saw bodies strewn bleeding upon the ground, mouths open in silent screams. Fellow colonists were slaughtered wholesale by unseen hands, dragged into the woods. Forsaking my own safety, I dashed towards a cabin, one of several set alight by flaming arrows. From within I could hear young Mary and Alfred crying, the very children I had sworn to protect when I signed their adoption papers in England. I battered down the door and rushed inside, searching frantically through the smoke. But I found only pools of blood, not a trace of their little bodies. The Indians were plundering our settlement, taking prisoners. I saw Eliza lifted kicking and screaming into the air as a savage seized her in his muscled arms. His face was painted with hellish symbols, teeth filed to points. She wailed for help, but was carried off into the night. Governor Bradford marshalled our remaining forces, firing muskets into the shadows as we herded women and children back towards the centre of town. But our numbers were too few. We were picked off one by one, overwhelmed by the enemy onslaught. That was when we saw them emerge from the forest. Humans they once may have been, but now they were but hollow vessels, inhabited by Satan himself. Empty eyes and slack jaws, bodies painted in occult markings. They shambled toward us, emitting otherworldly moans. Before this new horror, our courage broke. We scattered in all directions, pursued by both savages and demoniacs. I fled through the trees, lungs burning, hearing the screams of the dying behind me. I know not how long I ran in blind terror. At some point I collapsed, my body racked with exhaustion and grief. I lay there in the dirt, sobbing at our calamity. It felt as though God had forsaken this new Eden, casting us out into a vast wilderness, teeming with servants of darkness. I eventually slipped into oblivion, too broken to even feel fear in those shadowy hours before dawn. Only by some small miracle did I survive. When I came to, I found myself slumped against a tree, covered in cuts and caked blood. The rising sun illuminated a scene of devastation. Burnt homes, the mangled corpses of livestock. Sulphuric fumes hung in the air, the lingering traces of some unholy ritual. In the coming weeks, we few survivors salvaged what we could and abandoned the settlement. We sailed up and down the coast, finding no sign of life except for one grey-faced man wandering the forest, blabbering in tongues. His eyes were vacant, soul hollowed out. We returned to England, humbled, speaking only of savages, but I know evil came to Plymouth Colony that night, evil in its purest form. It still haunts my dreams, this lurking malice I cannot name. So be vigilant, dear reader. Do not discount the legions of darkness and their crafty servants. We banished them from our shores once before, but evil of such depth never truly dies. It but waits to rise again.